All right, today we're going to be conducting an experiment with the pasta rocket and seeing how oxygen and a complex carb create a fuel and fuel our fire. So there are three different types of rocket engines that use a fuel source that is solid fuel, liquid fuel, and a hybrid, which is what our pasta rocket's going to be. So the hybrid uses a solid combustible source, so in our case is going to be the pasta, and a gas oxidizer like oxygen, which we're going to get from the reaction or the breakdown of hydrogen peroxide with the yeast. So the pasta rocket, like I said, is the hybrid. It uses the pasta, which is a complex carbohydrate, as fuel, and the oxygen is going to be the oxidizer that fuels the fire, and that's going to come from the breakdown, like I said, of hydrogen peroxide using the catalyst, which is the yeast, to then break down into water and oxygen at a fast rate. Most rockets use a solid fuel source and they cannot be shut off. It's going to burn until that fuel runs out. Whereas with our hybrid, we can turn it on and off, and the intensity of it can be adjusted by adjusting how much oxygen or oxidizer is being let into the fuel source. Is being fed into the solid fuel source. So the oxygen that's being released from the peroxide, because with this baking yeast or any kind of yeast, it has a catalyst enzyme in it called catalase that breaks down millions of hydrogen peroxide molecules in seconds. So it works really fast. It really speeds up the breakdown of hydrogen peroxide into oxygen and water. So that's helpful for us in this, because if it's releasing an enormous amount of oxygen at one time, it's going to be a better fuel source for our fire. On the hydrogen peroxide that we're using on the back, it says hydrogen peroxide 3%, which means that for every, make sure I don't say it backwards, for each milliliter of hydrogen peroxide, there will be 3 milliliters of oxygen generated. I've actually already conducted it. It smells like burning pasta in here. Just want to make sure it worked. But the production of oxygen from this hydrogen peroxide is an exothermic process. Not only it releases energy, but it's releasing heat. And I felt the bottle after the experiment, and it was very, very warm. I was not expecting that. So we talked about that the cells in catalase break down millions of hydrogen peroxide per second. Yeast is not a part of the equation. It's just the catalyst in this equation. It's just the hydrogen peroxide is the reactant, breaks down, and it releases water and oxygen. I was thinking about variable changes that could affect this experiment. Could be the size of your jar, whether you have a really tall, wide, things like that. I also said the type of pasta that you use, whether you used whole wheat or if you used a white flour, if that would affect your fuel source, if one burns better than the other. Also with the pasta, a different diameter. This one's really thin and narrow and really funnels all the oxygen being released to this one concentrated area. But if you were to do it with a wider diameter so that the oxygen could kind of disperse a little bit more, I don't know if it would affect the rate of the burn. And then the other thing is, I was looking online, and apparently you can buy higher percentage of hydrogen peroxide. And if you have higher percentage, you're going to produce more oxygen and probably more rapidly with the yeast. So that also might affect your experiment. So now we will conduct the experiment. We'll move the precious laptop. All right, so I already have hydrogen peroxide poured in here. I have water to put this out if it gets crazy. We have our ziti and we have our yeast. All right, so with this, this is going to be our solid fuel source, and then the release of the oxygen is going to be feeding this fire. And per what I was hypothesizing with the hybrid is you can control the flame or the amount of ignition by how much oxygen you're releasing into it. With this, we don't really have an on and off switch that we can control it with, but we can see as it starts releasing more oxygen that the fire is going to become more, a little bit more powerful. All right, so dump some yeast in, screw this on, kind of get the reaction going. So as that starts bubbling, we're ready. Let me try to light this. And so it starts to ignite, and there we go. With the oxygen fully fueling it, then it begins to take off a lot more and burning, and you can actually see it burning within the noodle. All right, and this is where I don't want to burn the house down, so I'm going to put it out. Overall, the experiment worked. As the oxygen became stronger in fueling the fire and started releasing more, than the fire took off much quicker. So this is our solid source, and like I said, I don't know if we switched up the pasta, the diameter, the type, if it would affect it, but overall this experiment worked and we made a pasta rocket. Thanks.